Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started.
This story began with a dream that a girl named Nebi had. But this dream was not pleasant for her because it was of a rather intimate nature with a person whom she certainly did not expect to see there. And as soon as Nebi woke up, she immediately realized that she was able to see this dream again. This was not the first time this had happened. She saw absolutely every day such strange dreams, as soon as she moved into that mysterious world. In order to calm down a little, the girl went to the window and looked out. It was already quite light there. Everything around was shining from the morning sun. That's right, the girl was a traveler in time and worlds, and it was for this reason that she found herself in a place completely unfamiliar to her. 3 days ago, as a modern person, she came into that new wonderful world, and eventually, she thus became the chief saint of the Holy Order of Nebi. The Holy Order was a human organization in the Land of Light, which is where she ended up. And these delightful tears of the saint could be a weapon against the race of demons that constantly attacked that beautiful area. All of these girls were, of course, simply stunningly beautiful. But Nebi was especially so, because her blood could be turned into a weapon that was much more powerful than tears. But on the other hand, demons lived in the land of night, and they were very hostile to people and often participated in various battles in order to defeat each other. Of course, all the saints began to protect their land from these demons, because they considered them the most terrible creature. But when Nebi moved to that world, she started seeing these strange dreams and didn't understand why. They were really unnerving. Each time, the same man appeared in them, who was completely incomprehensible to her. She had never met him and could not even guess who he could be. And besides, all the details that appeared in that dream were so vivid, as if she herself were living it in reality. Nebi very uneasy, because after this she had the feeling as if everything that happened to her there was real, and she simply could not forget it all. Every time the girl remembered this or that dream, she immediately felt ashamed. Her cheeks turned red, and her heartbeat quickened. After some time, someone suddenly knocked on her door. This man was her guardian knight, and he told the saint that he had already arrived. Nebi was a little surprised because she didn't think that guests could come to her so early, but she immediately told them to wait there and that she was already on her way. The girl really quickly got up from her seat and walked to the door, but as soon as she opened it, she was incredibly surprised to see the man standing in front of her. He was a dark-haired, tall man of rank, and on his face he had a mask. His golden eyes simply sparkled in the beautiful sunlight. Nebi, seeing him, was a little surprised because he was dressed all in black. And besides, his figure scared her a little. But the girl quickly managed to control herself and immediately asked if it was true that he was her new guardian knight. The guy, immediately looking into her eyes, said that his name was Tylo, and she could also call him by just his name. She immediately told him that before they started discussing various matters, he should first go inside, because she did not feel very comfortable talking on the threshold. Tylo did so immediately without saying a word. He simply walked inside, and the girl closed the door behind him. She wondered what a guardian knight could do, and guessed that it was probably something similar to a bodyguard in her original world. But then she was very alarmed by another thing. Why was Tylo wearing some very strange muzzle on his face? But as soon as the girl turned around to talk to him, she saw that he had taken off the top of his black robe and, revealing his naked torso in front of her, told her to check. Nebi, of course, immediately became very embarrassed. Her whole face turned red, and she immediately asked in a voice trembling from incomprehension what she was supposed to check. The guy, coming closer to her, told her to raise her hand. The girl, not understanding what was happening, immediately did so. But then suddenly, Tylo grabbed her hand. She immediately asked what he was doing because she felt uneasy about all this. The girl's new guardian knight said that he wanted her to check his body carefully to see if it was suitable for her. Then he pulled her hand straight to his muscular chest and thus made her check. After that, he lowered their hands to his abs and said that she should check everything carefully so that there would be no misunderstandings in the future. Nebi was incredibly embarrassed. She didn't understand what was going on there at all, and she also didn't know if guardian knights and saints should have such a relationship. For her, all this was really very strange and incomprehensible, and she even wondered whether she had really gotten into the Holy Order. He held her trembling hand and had already begun to move it down her stomach, saying that she should check there too. Then the girl couldn't take it anymore. She pulled her hand away and said that he didn't need to continue. She was absolutely satisfied with his body, so there was no need to do any further checks. As soon as Nebi realized what she said, she immediately became embarrassed because she wanted to say something else, but because she was so worried, she didn't have time to think. With a heavy sigh, she turned to Tylo and asked if he could put his clothes back on first. The man did not object and immediately threw the cape back on. In order to do this, he had to move away, because he had thrown her to another part of the room, and the girl, meanwhile, was still standing in place. As soon as he moved away from her, she was finally able to breathe out with relief, and her cheeks returned to their normal color. Then the girl went to the chair and looked out the window. She thought that she had not yet figured out the dream that had been with her for several days. But then this strange night passed by. At some point, it even seemed to her that she could go crazy if all this did not simply end, because for her it was simply a disgusting feeling. Nebi seriously thought about what kind of world this was, because she had never met anything like it. And after some time, the man finally returned. He was now fully dressed in uniform. He even had a jacket on. Tylo, turning to her, said that he had already changed his clothes, so he asked her to go with him. But before the girl could answer, there was suddenly a huge explosion right next to the window where she was sitting. Nebi couldn't do anything. She even fell to the ground from such a strong blow and just lay there for a while. Luckily for her, Tylo came to her pretty quickly. He picked her up and told her that demons were attacking. They could have killed everyone, but he said that he took the saint and was going to save her. Nebi didn't understand what was going on at all, but when he picked her up and started leading her closer to the exit, she asked, "Were they really ready to kill everyone?" The guy simply shook his head in response. He was focused on getting her out of that room safely. She thought that it was an ordinary fight, like always, but apparently it was something serious. And at that very moment, when the man began to lead the girl out of the castle, another man appeared not far from them. This guy was wearing a beautiful black military uniform. He had light gray hair, he was holding a beautiful rose in his hands, and when he saw Nebi, he immediately called her his dear and began to come closer. As soon as he looked at her with his incredibly light pink eyes, he immediately said that he had come to take her away. The girl didn't understand what was going on at all. She was sitting on her bodyguard's lap and didn't even notice the man at first, who was several floors higher than them. Of course, when he saw the girl, he was very happy because he was able to find her, but he was wary of the guy who was holding her in his arms. He thought that this could be a little problematic for him now. When they came outside, Nebi noticed that her beautiful and magnificent house was destroyed, leaving only ruins and dead bodies all around. Bloody screams and groans were heard everywhere, because some people fought against the demons and, unfortunately, died. Nebi knew that battles between humans and demons were brutal, but she had never seen them in real life, and so this sight was simply terrifying to her. Now she understood what the world she had found herself in actually looked like, because all the time before that, she had simply sat in her holy temple and did not go out. When Tylo hid them behind a rock so the demons wouldn't notice them, she turned to him and asked him to let her go so they could run faster. But the man replied that he could not do that, since he was her holy knight and had to protect her with his life. At that very moment, the man who had arrived with the rose for Nebi was standing nearby and watching what was happening. He was a little angry because from the outside it looked like some kind of mouse had appeared next to the girl, and he didn't like that. The man even thought that this happened because she had been without him for too long and she became lonely, so she found some ridiculous replacement for herself. At that very moment, Tylo stood up again after the battle with the demon was over, and taking the girl in his arms, began to lead her away. However, a voice from behind them suddenly addressed them and said that this was an official introduction. The same man with silver hair, whose eyes had already turned red, said that he was the leader of the demons, and his name was Tatus. As soon as Nebi turned her head to the side and saw him, she immediately realized that this was the same stranger from her terribly strange dreams. She felt like she couldn't move and was frozen. She didn't understand what had happened, but she assumed it was all because of the fear she felt for this man. But Tylo, turning his head to the side and seeing this man, immediately became wary. He wanted to do something but did not have time. And all because Tatus, with the help of his demon magic, was able to throw the man aside, and he lifted the girl up and began to pull her towards him. She could not move, and therefore it was easy for him to do this. When she was already next to the man, he grabbed her around the waist, and Nebi turned to Tylo and screamed loudly, because she thought that everything was bad with him. Due to the strong blow, the man did not answer her. He was unconscious, and Tatus turned her head towards him so that she would look at him. With a smile on his face, the man asked, "Was it really true that even though he was already next to her, she still continued to look at other men?" He moved closer to her and called her his dear Nebi, and said that her actions like that made him sad. And at that moment, the man suddenly started kissing her on the lips. The girl did not understand whether all this was reality or another one of her dreams. They continued kissing, and Nebi didn't understand why she couldn't just move away from him. She even instinctively wanted to give in, but nothing worked. He continued kissing her, and she kissed him back. It all felt as if her body wanted it, and because of that, her mind couldn't influence it. When the man finished kissing her lips, he moved to her neck, and at that moment the girl felt as if her body had been waiting for this man all this time. Tylo, who had finally come to his senses at this point, was watching the whole thing. His muzzle had been broken by the powerful blow to the back of his head, and blood was visible running down his entire face. As he watched the girl give herself to this man, he did not understand where she could get such an expression on her face, as if she was getting wild pleasure from what was happening. Tatus turned to Nebi and said that he wanted her immediately. The girl at this point tried to push him away and told him to let her go, and also called him a pervert. It was all useless. The man had quite a strong grasp, and as soon as he heard what she called him, he immediately laughed. The man, running his finger along her cheek, said that they, demons, openly expressed their desires, unlike humans, who were incredibly hypocritical. And then suddenly, he, looking straight into her eyes, asked, "Did the girl really think that she was just an ordinary person?" Nebi, hearing this, immediately became worried. She asked what he meant when he said this phrase. The man liked how he could control her, so he said with a smile on his face that they were both fragments of the night god's soul, and they were destined to become one. This is the phrase he said after he felt a strong attraction to the girl. In fact, many years ago, the god of light and the god of night ruled this entire world together, and it was one of the best times. However, later, the god of night created a stronger race of demons and wanted to make the fragile humans simply disappear. The god of light did not agree and blessed some people, giving them the strength to fight precisely against these demons in order to protect all other innocent people. And this situation caused a sudden split between the god of light and the god of night, who had previously always been incredibly friendly and ideal rulers. And thus the world was divided into the land of eternal day and the land of eternal night. And the demons who inherited the will of the god of night sought to exterminate humans for many generations, and they actually succeeded quite well. This was the legend of the god of light and the god of night, and it was known to many of the inhabitants who lived in the world that Nebi found herself in. The girl knew perfectly well that she was a human, but she could also fight the demon, just like the saints. But then she thought about it. Did the god of night really want to kill people like her? Who could possess a piece of his soul? The man, hugging Nebi, said that he could not believe that she did not believe him, and also asked if she had not felt it herself yet. Tatus didn't even give her time to answer, saying that she couldn't refuse him because her body craved him, and he was used to trusting exactly such feelings. Of course, the girl didn't like all this, but she understood that she couldn't just give in and make everything go according to this stranger's rules. She didn't know if what he was saying was true or not, but there was absolutely no way she could fall into his hands. So the girl used her magical abilities and was able to push him away from her. When Tattoo saw that she actually used her power, he was incredibly surprised. He did not expect that she could use it against him. Of course, the man thought that it would be very easy for him to capture the girl, but it turned out that it was not so. Of course, the man was much stronger than her, so he was able to easily parry her next blows that Nebi dealt to him. Tylo, who was sitting nearby, suddenly realized that he could move, because before that he couldn't do it. He just sat and watched as all this happened, but now he could finally move his limbs. The man immediately ran up to the girl and grabbed her by the shoulders before she could fall to the ground due to the amount of energy she had spent on these blows. He immediately told Mrs. Nabby that they had to get out of there. After that, he picked her up and started running away as fast as he could, even though he was in extreme pain all over his body. Nabby didn't resist, of course. She just lay there in his arms, hoping that it had worked a little bit. While they were running, Tattoos, who had hit the wall and even cut his cheek, was shocked. When he touched his blood, he could not believe that it was true. The man did not understand how it could happen that he was wounded, because this had never happened to him before. And then suddenly, some girl was able to wound him. And so, several hours passed from that moment. It was already incredibly dark outside, and Tattoos returned to his estate of the night. There he was immediately met by a little girl and a woman who was wrapped in a cloak the color of night. The girl suddenly screamed at him and said that even if she was a saint, she could only communicate with ordinary demons. It was the man's sister, Lumia, and as she hugged her little bear, she asked how she could possibly harm their tattoos. The demon high priestess, who was also present, replied that it was all because she possessed the same fragment of the night god's soul as the body of a human saint. The woman also explained that it was a unique combination that gave her the strength to resist even Lord Tattoos, whom no one could harm. Then the priestess turned directly to the man and said that if he wanted to complete this great plan immediately, he must force her to voluntarily become one with him. Tattoos sighed heavily and looked away. He said that it was certainly a good idea, but he didn't know how to implement it. When he first met Nabby, he immediately said that he had been waiting for her for so long, and absolutely every part of his soul and body was enchanted by her. He told the priestess that he would do everything so that she would voluntarily renounce grace and drown in the pleasure that he could provide her. He also said that he was going to make sure that her body and heart could not resist him. He was ready to go to any lengths to achieve this result, and all because he, being Tattoos, had to be the closest to her. No one else had to win her trust, soul, and body. It was he who belonged to this girl, just as she belonged to him. Lumia, who was standing to the side, frowned. She didn't understand why the other half of the night god's soul fragment wasn't her, and she thought it was unfair. That same night, while Nebi was sleeping, she had another nightmare that was directly related to this very demon king. She ran through the ruins that surrounded her estate, looking back. I hoped that for her nobody not chased. But at that moment, the girl was so carried away by the escape that she did not even notice how a man appeared in front of her, and she crashed straight into him. Of course, that person was Tattoos. He smiled, hugged her, and asked what was wrong and why she was so scared. The girl even started crying in her dream. She said that absolutely everyone around her was dying. There was a lot of blood, which she had never seen in real life, and it was just terrible for her. But the man, pulling her towards him, told her not to be afraid. Because he was there next to her, she didn't need to worry about anything. After that, he began to kiss her tenderly again, and before that, he said that very soon he was going to find her and make sure that nothing bothered her anymore. Kissing her hand, the man also said that very soon they were supposed to be together forever, and he was ready to do anything for this. Immediately after these words, Nebi woke up lying in bed with relief. She exhaled when she realized that all this was not real, but just a dream. But she still doubted. Was it really a dream, or had tattoos done something to her? When she turned to the side, she suddenly felt a hand on her waist. It was her guard knight. She understood that if things continued like this, she would simply go crazy. When she turned around, she noticed that Tylo was no longer asleep. He was looking at her with his golden eyes and said nothing, as if he was watching her sleep. The girl, seeing him, immediately screamed very loudly because she did not expect that he was lying in the same bed with her. They were both in the Holy Order's second base, and Nebi immediately pulled away from him, asking what he was doing in her bed anyway. The man sat down quite calmly and said that the paladin must protect the saint, and that is why he always eats and sleeps with her, and does not leave her side for a single step. Nabi didn't like all this. She didn't understand how he was going to be present with her all the time when, for example, she needed to take a bath. The man explained that in that case, he had to carefully help her wash her body and then dry her entire body with a soft towel so that not the slightest drop of water remained there. The man didn't even have time to finish this sentence because the girl became too embarrassed by everything he was saying, so she covered his mouth with her hand so that he wouldn't continue. "Let go!" Nebi cried out to Tylo, asking, did he really have to go that far to keep her safe? And she wondered if he was embarrassed by all of this. Wasn't he uncomfortable with the fact that they had to spend all of their time together? Tylo gently took her hand and told her that it wasn't like that at all. He was an artificial being that was specially created to protect her, so he didn't know feelings like embarrassment or awkwardness. He explained to the girl that it was quite natural for him to do everything she did and to do it together. Nebi looked at him in surprise and didn't understand how this was possible, so she asked what artificial creature meant. The man suddenly took off his shirt and said that this life form was created by the gentleman deacons using ancient holy seals. And at that time he was the only one among all such paladins. That is, no one like him existed yet. Nebi couldn't believe it. She looked at him in amazement and noticed that all the wounds that were still present on his body the night before had somehow magically just disappeared. She reached out her hand to his perfectly clean body and said that she clearly remembered that he had received a wound from Tatus, and so she asked where it had gone. The man, smiling happily, replied that artificial beings could heal themselves by consuming their own life force. That is exactly like this way he healed all their wounds. Of course, Nebi had never heard of anything like this and couldn't believe that such a thing was even possible somewhere. The man said that it was exactly like that. He consumed life energy because he was not considered a human being. He was an artificial being, not like everyone else. The girl then reached out and took his hand. She wanted to examine every part of his body to understand how this was possible. Tylo, with his head down, replied that she didn't have to worry about anything. She could also order him to do absolutely anything, even if it was dangerous to the life of an ordinary person. He came closer to her and said that she could do anything she wanted with him. At that moment, his hand took her golden one, and they looked into each other's eyes for a while, without taking their eyes off each other. Nebi looked at him in surprise, not understanding what it meant that she could do anything, but then she suddenly realized that they were too close to each other, and, most likely, she assumed that this was a hint at some kind of closeness between them. But they didn't have time to say anything more to each other, because there was a knock on the door, and they asked if the saint had woken up yet, because the High Deacon wanted to see her. Nebi, hearing about some High Deacon, was immediately very surprised. She looked at her Knight Protector and asked what it meant. The man immediately explained that it was he who was the highest person in this holy place, although he did not have the power of a saint. The guy also explained that he had incredible supreme wisdom. There was never anything in the Holy Order that he didn't know, which is why he was very powerful in his own. As soon as Nebi heard this, she immediately became wary and assumed that since he knew absolutely everything, he could thus guess that she was a time traveler. She turned to Tylo in an anxious voice and asked if she really needed to meet with this High Deacon. The man sighed heavily and replied that it was indeed so. No one could or had the right to refuse the request of a superior man. But the girl was still very worried. She really didn't want to meet this man. But avoiding him wasn't a healthy option either, so she had to just take it one step at a time. When Tylo saw her worried expression, he said that the girl shouldn't be nervous about it at all. He always stayed by her side, and therefore in any unclear situation, he would be able to protect her. Hearing these words, the girl looked at him with hope, and then smiling sweetly, thanked him for this and said that it was very valuable to her. In fact, Nebi was really pleased that he had come to this place to always protect her. Now she could really feel safe, even if something unpleasant were to happen. The man put the shirt on himself and, getting out of bed, replied that he was going to help her change her clothes, since that was also part of his duties. Of course, Nebi didn't like it. She started talking quickly about how there was no need for it. She could have done it herself. She still managed to persuade him, and after some time the girl had already changed into an incredibly beautiful dark blue outfit with white inserts. When it was all over, she looked at herself in the mirror and was now definitely ready to meet this mysterious High Deacon. She was going to just play along with this whole situation if anything happened, and in the worst case, just confess to everything. Tylo walked in. He told the girl that they could leave already. The man had also changed his clothes. He was wearing the same black uniform with blue inserts, and he looked very respectable. As he came closer to her, she was alarmed. She hadn't been able to get a good look at him before, but now she noticed that Tylo looked even more handsome in his nightly uniform than usual. Immediately after this, they set off for this long-awaited meeting. As they walked, no one uttered a single word, particularly because Nebi was very worried. When they came to the right door, the girl hesitated for a while. She looked at it and didn't know if she should do it. Plucking up her courage, she knocked and immediately opened the door, and then entered a fairly spacious office in which there was only one table near the window. Behind him sat a man with long silver hair. This was the very same High Deacon. Tylo immediately followed her. She bowed, greeted the man, and said that she had come as he had called her. The man looked up at her and said that it seemed to him that her wounds had healed well, and so it calmed him down a little, because he would not want her to suffer much after what had happened. Nebi looked at him and heard a rather strange tone, so she assumed that most likely this man did not know that she was not the original saint. This, of course, calmed the girl down a little. Then the man said that he had called her because he wanted to ask her something, and it was, in his opinion, quite important. The most important thing was that he wanted to ask about that day of the bombing, namely about the head of the demons, Tatos. He looked at her with a very stern look and immediately asked why he was going to take only her. As soon as the girl heard this, she immediately became worried, because she was afraid that this could cause her serious problems. She noticed that the High Deacon's gaze was incredibly sharp, as if he could see right through everything. But the voice that was in her heart reminded her that she absolutely could not reveal the whole truth, because even her life depended on it to some extent. She was silent for a while, but then said that Tatos said he wanted to take her to the land of night as a trophy. She took the chance to splatter blood in his face and ran away while he was distracted by examining his wounds. The man, looking down slightly, said that now it was clear to him why he had appeared in person this time. As soon as Nebi saw that expression on his face, she immediately thought that most likely he really believed her. And the man, turning to her, said that it was very good that she turned out to be so smart, because otherwise the consequences would have been incredibly terrible, that he was afraid to even imagine it. He explained that the leader of the demons, Tatus, had inherited half of the night god's soul, which had split and possessed terrifying power. He despised people and acted with insane cruelty. This man was a real madman who should be feared. The man also explained to the girl that only he could do something so crazy, like blow up the Holy Order. The girl, upon hearing this information, immediately became worried and asked if there was a possibility that Tatus would again use the same method to bomb the place where they were. But the deacon replied that she could be absolutely certain that this would not happen, After all, they had installed several layers of hidden barriers that should not have allowed him anywhere near. The girl, hearing this, immediately became happy and realized that in this case, she and this place were safe. But she still understood that she still had questions that she needed answers to. So the girl said that she would also like to ask him something. The man, smiling happily, said that of course she could ask whatever she wanted. Then Nebi replied that he was talking about Tatus only inheriting half of the night god's soul, and so she was wondering where the other half was. She also said that if the other half was in the land of light, then how was the Holy Order supposed to deal with all this? The deacon sighed heavily and asked how a fragment of the night god's soul could appear in the land of light. He said that it was completely impossible, so she didn't need to worry. However, the girl still began to insist and asked what would happen if this really happened. The man smiled and replied that the god of night represented the demons, and if this could really happen, then for the safety of humanity, they would have to take extreme measures. The deacon explained that in that case, they would definitely execute this person who inherited the fragment of the god of night, because such a thing should not exist. Of course, upon hearing this, the girl immediately became wary, and she could not believe that the person who inherited the fragment of God's soul had to be executed. She thought that it could just be a soul transfer, and also doubted whether the Holy Order would allow such a strange thing to happen. She also thought that if they somehow found out that she was not actually Saint Nebi, then they would definitely execute her without any hesitation. The girl understood that now she absolutely could not allow them to reveal these two things, so she had to keep this secret to herself with all her might. Then suddenly the deacon addressed her several times, because the girl did not hear. As soon as she heard her name for the third time, she immediately asked him for forgiveness. She said she had been a bit confused the last few days and didn't know what it was about. Kino smiled and said it was okay. It was his fault. He explained that the encounter with Tados had probably left her with very severe psychological trauma, and for this reason, it had been quite difficult for her to adapt to the current situation lately. Nabi, hanging her head down, replied that if he had nothing else, she would like to leave right then. However, the man suddenly stopped her and said that he also had one more thing, and Tylo, who was standing behind her, suddenly fell to his knees, and some kind of golden circle appeared under him, which apparently caused him pain. The girl immediately ran up to him and asked what happened, because his whole body was shaking, and she understood that something was clearly wrong. The man struggled, but did not respond. He was really in incredible pain, and there was nothing he could do about it. Then the deacon rose from his seat and said that as a knight he had failed to protect the saint, and that was why he had sent down upon him the punishment he deserved. The girl was very surprised. She felt incredibly sorry for Tylo, because she knew that he did not deserve all this. He was always there and tried to protect her with all his might. The High Saint replied that a man had to always remember his mission and absolutely always protect Her Highness first and foremost. The man was in great pain, and the saint also said that even if he was wounded, maimed, or dead, he had to protect the saint at all costs, even if it cost him his life. But since the man did not do this, now he must be punished. Tylo, covering his head with his hand, said that he remembered all this perfectly well, and really agreed that he did not carry out his order. At that moment, the pain reached such a peak that he even began to cough up blood because his whole body was wounded. Nabi, seeing this, of course, immediately protested. She began to scream at the man, asking him to stop doing this, and also wondered why he was torturing the man so much. His Holiness immediately replied in a cold voice that the knight who had allowed the saint to suffer should be punished according to his deserts. He also said that in this way they should reflect and do everything possible to protect the saint in the future, as was due. The deacon also said that the girl should be well aware of the fact that Tylo was an artificial being, and he should understand this even more. But the girl protested and said that absolutely no one could avoid the status without harming themselves. So she explained that the guy did everything in his power. The man didn't care at all. He said that it was the rule of the Holy Order. No one was an exception. So he had to do the same. Of course, Nabby was incredibly sad about what happened. She didn't want Tylo to get so hurt and punished because of all this. She sat with him for some time and even decided to get into this circle of suffering as well. She moved away man further away, and myself was located there. The girl immediately began to feel severe pain, and as soon as Tylo came to his senses, he saw this. He was worried that something was wrong with her, and did not know what to do. Deacon, when he saw this, immediately used his abilities and removed this magic circle that was causing suffering and pain. After that, he shouted at the girl and asked if she had accidentally gone crazy, since she almost received an answer from the Holy Seal. Nebby, at this point, breathing very heavily, finally came to her senses and said that she had told him that without Tylo, she would not have been able to escape from Tatus. And it was for this reason that she believed that Tylo should not have been punished at all. But even if it was inevitable, she made the decision to be punished herself as well. Of course, the saint was amazed by her courage, impudence, and strong-willed decision, so for some time he simply looked at the girl in silence. Then he simply turned around and, returning to his desk, said that this matter had to end there, after which he replied that they could now return to their rooms. Of course, Nebby, upon hearing this, immediately became happy and thanked His Highness for such generosity. This meant that Tylo now did not have to be punished. Immediately after this happened, they returned back to that extension, namely to the room. The girl accompanied Tylo because what to him was hard go. She said that he should have gone to bed first, and then, having laid him down, she sat down on a chair next to him and was going to watch his condition very closely. When the man lay down and closed his eyes, she immediately asked him with concern if he felt any discomfort and if he was still in pain. Tylo didn't answer. He simply turned to the girl and asked why. Nebby was a little surprised to hear this question and immediately asked what he meant when he asked such a thing. The man replied in a quiet voice that he did not understand why she did what she did, since he was an artificial being and could be gotten rid of at any desire. He also said that it didn't matter how badly he was injured. He could recover at any moment and not feel any pain. The man sat up in bed and, looking at the girl in surprise, asked why. Knowing this information, she decided to save him in that case.